Welcome to Between Over and Next with your hosts, Holly and Robert, a happily married couple who explore the space between what was, what is, and what's to come. From career changes to navigating life's uncertainties, this dynamic duo will empower you to live your happiest life at every age and stage. So, get ready because your journey with Holly and Robert starts now.
Hello and welcome to Between Over and Next. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Robert.
You look so nice today for those people who are not watching on video and just listening to us.
And for those that are watching, I am wearing a sweater that I love because, what does it say?
Happy.
Yeah.
Happy.
And I am happy. And we hope that you're happy too. And if you want to be even happier, we know you're going to love this episode because It's all about possibility. We believe you owe it to yourself to make a change, to pursue a happier life. And we do believe in today's fast-paced and demanding world, finding happiness and fulfillment in both our work and personal lives can often feel very hard. So Robert and I watched a TED Talks that was recommended to us by our friend Jeff. The name of it is called The Art of the Second Act. And it was just released last month. Mm-hmm. And after watching it, I reached out to the speaker, Andy Levine, because we wanted to have him on Between Over and Next. He is the creator and co-host of Second Act Stories podcast. So he's a fellow podcaster. And he has interviewed about 150 or more courageous individuals pursuing a better life in a second act. And in the TED Talks, he talks about 5 key lessons that emerged from his experience from his interviews. And he is here with us today.
So let's meet Andy.
We are so happy you're here with us today, Andy.
And the feeling's very mutual. Thank you, Holly.
I loved your TED Talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And specifically what your focus is on, talking about second acts, because that's something that really is very meaningful to Robert and I, because what matters most is living your happiest, most fulfilled life at every age and stage. Age is, to me, is just a number. But happiness, that is something that is defined differently by most. So how would you define happiness?
You know, to me, if you wake up in the morning and you look forward to your day and you wake up and say, gosh, I'm going to be doing this, this, and this, and this, and I really look forward to that. That's a great way to wake up. And unfortunately, I don't think most people in America wake up that way. What I'm hoping to do with Second Act Stories, and I think it's very in line with what the two of you are doing, is help people find a little more happiness. And if they're in an unhappy situation, make a change.
Let's talk about your personal story first then.
Sure.
Talking about change, because change is something we focus on is with the pivot, and it is the power of change in our life stories. And I would love for you to share more about what you have been experiencing lately, your next in your personal journey.
So I'm 62 years old. I have a wonderful wife I've been married to for a long time, have 2 adult children, a 39-year-old who works in New York City, a 32-year-old who's a jazz musician in Chicago. I joined my father's company, just talking about my professional life, at the age of 30 back in 1991, and I took over his firm, which was a specialized marketing firm in New York City. It was about 8 people when I took over and grew it to about 50 people, and it's been going along really well. When I hit my mid-50s, I kind of was like, gosh, I think I'm ready for something else. I'm ready to do something different. And as I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, I sort of came up with 4 different paths that I wanted to try, and I decided to try them simultaneously. One is to start a podcast called Second Act Stories. Been very rewarding, very successful, fun to do. I've always been fascinated by people who have the courage to say, hey, I've done this for 10, 15, 25 years. Now I want to do something completely different. The other success that I've had is coaching a cross-country team. I've always loved to run, and I never did cross country in high school. I wish I had, but I was mentored by a really good coach in Colts Neck. His name is Jim Schlentz, and for 3 years, he took me under his wing, and he taught me all about cross country running, and he's a really good coach. So I learned a lot, and 2 years ago, I felt comfortable enough to coach my own team. So I took on, it's an elementary, middle school team. That's been very rewarding, very fun, and I enjoyed that a lot. So those are the success side. On the failure side, I decided, I took over my dad's company. I want to try my hand at entrepreneurship, and can I be a successful entrepreneur? So with a friend, I started a company called 7 Thank Yous. We invested hundreds of hours of time. We put in about 10 grand, and it completely failed.
What is 7 Thank Yous?
The idea was that we would trace back and find someone in your past, might be a high school teacher, a coach, a family friend, someone that you'd lost touch with completely. We would find them, and you would do a thank you video to them, and we'd deliver it to them. And we tested it. We thought this is a great idea. In the tests, we tested mostly with family and friends. It worked out fantastically well. When we got it to the marketplace, we couldn't get any traction for it. So for whatever reason, we couldn't get it off the ground. The fourth thing was I wanted to get a little bit involved in local politics. My community, I live by the Jersey Shore in a town called Ocean Grove, and we have a tremendous parking problem in the summer. And I said, we've got to solve this problem. So we created a committee. We did lobbying of public officials. We did some major public meetings, created a great deal of noise, but never solved the problem. We couldn't get implementation of the solution that we came up with. But the big change is about 18 months ago, my wife and I, my wife's cousin was dying of cancer. She was a single mom, had a 10-year-old girl, and we offered to adopt her daughter. And so, having been out of the parenting business for a decade, this was a pretty significant change in our lives. Been very rewarding, but, she has just blossomed and has done really well. And, it's very rewarding to us to see her growth. And I think we've gotten as much out of it as what we're giving to her. And so that's been a great change as well.
I believe we learn from and with our children, and you probably have so much more wisdom now on how to approach parenting.
It's interesting. I recently came across a Wall Street Journal article that talked about older parents and certain advantages that older parents have. You're sort of not in the hunt to climb the corporate ladder or build a career or that sort of thing. You have, in some cases, my case, a lot more time to commit to it and to spend to it. And yeah, maybe there's a little bit of more wisdom as well. So from my perspective, it's been great.
We really appreciate your setting the stage with your story, especially since your podcast focuses on those with their second act stories. So, Andy, when I watch your TED Talks, the statistic makes me sad.
Gallup does a survey, and they look at the unhappy category. And this is really focused on work life, I guess you'd say. But they focus on a group they call the quiet quitters. That's 59% of the people they surveyed. It's a huge percentage. And those are people who are in a job. They're sort of watching the clock all day long. Their work life lacks purpose. They're doing something that lacks meaning to them. And
that's a big
yeah.
Common denominator with happiness is purpose.
Yeah, I find also that the corporate model itself is not built around keeping employees happy. It's built around the higher-ups making sure that the people beneath them are doing their job so they don't lose their job.
Right, and making money.
Yeah,
and the measurement is profit. I think that's, hopefully changing a little bit in terms of corporate America. But I think you're absolutely right, Robert. I mean, that's the driver is not how happy are our staff. The driver is how much money do we make this year. One of the guys I interviewed, by the way, just had a great quote. He said that the walls of fear are paper thin. They're easy to break through. But they keep people locked in, and everyone wants to, have the money to raise whatever they want to do, raise a family, have a good life, that sort of thing. But money without purpose is a tough way to live.
And money doesn't buy happiness.
No, that's certainly true.
There were 5 key lessons. I would love for you to walk us through them, because these common threads that emerge from the experiences that you have learned through your podcast is quite interesting. And I think it can help others realize they're not alone, and also to put some context into, again, the reasons why behind these feelings and with what's possible and next for them.
So again, just by way of background, we've interviewed almost 150 people at this point. And so we do have a reservoir, a database of things. And as my co-host and I looked at these things together, we sort of said, here are 5 common themes that we see over and over again in our podcast. The first one is that trauma is often the trigger. And so we look at people who go through some sort of a traumatic event. It might be a divorce, might be the loss of a loved one, might be being fired from your job, might be an illness. It could be a global event like COVID-19 or September 11th. But they go through this traumatic event, and it makes them rethink their life and rethink what they're doing and say, okay, it's time to do something different, time to make a change. My favorite example of this that I talk about in the TED Talk is a guy named Peter Rork, who was this incredibly successful orthopedic surgeon. He was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He married this woman he loved. They had this beautiful wedding in Hawaii. And then 2 months after the wedding, she had a heart attack and died. And just totally unexpected. This was, a woman who was in great shape and everything. And he just went into complete despair. And he moved away to a vacation home he owned. He stopped eating. He stopped seeing friends. He just sort of cut himself off from the world. And then one day a friend called him up and said, hey, one of the organizations I work with is the ASPCA in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We want to move dogs out of kill shelters in California and bring them to loving homes in Wyoming. And Peter happened to be an amateur pilot. And so they said, would you help us fly these dogs in your plane? He had this tiny little plane, a 4-seater. And so he said, sure. And his wife had been really into animal rescue. Their dog had been a rescue dog named Dudley. So he started doing this. And as he started doing this, he just realized how enormous the problem was. He talked about the first kill shelter he started working with, and only 7% of the dogs were adopted. And every Friday, they would take any dogs that were still alive and they would euthanize them, and then they'd start fresh on Monday because they couldn't get people to come in and take care of the dogs every weekend. So he realized, and we looked at it nationally, 2.6 million dogs a year are euthanized. Huge number. So he said, I got to do something about this. So he mortgages his house and he buys a large plane, $1 million plane, used plane that he buys. And now instead of moving, 2 large dogs in the back seat of his 4-seater, he's moving like 100 dogs at a time, 200 dogs at a time. And he's starting to make a difference. So they have saved, I actually just talked to him about a month ago. They've saved 31,000 dogs so far.
Wow.
But trauma was the trigger. And that's what, when after his wife died, he basically said, I'm done helping people.
So
I'm going to help dogs.
So he had loneliness, he had loss. He turned something unhappy into something that gave him joy and contentment.
At the end of the interview, I asked him, what do you think your wife, Meg, would think of what you're doing? I think he said, he started crying. He just said, I think she'd be really happy with what I've done.
And proud.
Yeah, really happy and proud. So that's now you don't need to have trauma to do a second act. But in 40% of the people we've interviewed, that is the trigger. That is what drives them. The second one is we like to say, for inspiration, look back to your childhood. So when we looked at all the people we've interviewed, round number, about 30% of the people we've interviewed go back to something that they loved in their childhood. There was a guy I interviewed on the West Coast, Joe Bach was his name. And he's in his 70s. Growing up, he always wanted to be an athlete. And he was the worst athlete in his class. He was super smart, but he always wanted to be an athlete. He was terrible at it. So he was always on the bench. It stuck with him. He had a very successful career. He sold his company. And after he did, he went back to school basically to become a gym teacher. And this is in Los Angeles, but basically they take all the kids who are at the absolute bottom, just not coordinated, have trouble playing. He said, we're going to put you in your own league. So instead of being the bench warmer, it's a league of bench warmers.
Fabulous.
And, you know, when he first tried to get people to sign up, he got like one kid to sign up. And eventually he got to the point where he's doing 20, 30, 40, and now he's got it in several different places in Los Angeles. And other groups around the country are trying to copy it. But it's been tremendously rewarding to him. But the amazing thing to me is, you know, this is like 60 years ago. You know, 60 years later, he acts on this. But he went back to something that was really important to him and bothered him in his childhood that he couldn't achieve. And he didn't want to see another kid be on the bench and just feel bad about themselves for years and years.
What a wonderful mission to be on. And not only that, but to turn around challenges for others that he personally experienced.
Yeah. No,
Right?
He's an amazing story. I interviewed some of the parents. I interviewed one of the kids, and, you know, you could just see how meaningful this program was to them and their confidence. And some of the kids have gotten to a point where they're so good they can go back in the regular league now, and they feel very confident. And lesson number 3, there are leapers and there are planners. About 80% of the people we've interviewed are in the planner category. So they take a college course, they do a side hustle, they do an internship, they start interviewing people who are in the field that they want to be.
So it's very, very intentional.
Yeah, it's very intentional. It's a very rational approach. This is how they go about it. And you know, they have success based upon that. And, you know, for some of them, it might be a 6-month runway, 18-month runway, whatever, but they go about this intentionally. And then there are the leapers. I love interviewing the leapers. These are the 20% who just go into work one day and say, I quit. And they have no plan.
That's bold.
They have not saved any money and say, that's it. I'm going to do something else.
So they're risk takers.
They're risk takers. Yeah.
Is there an age demographic that you put to the leapers?
None. I've interviewed young people. I've interviewed old people who've done it. So no age demographic. In our little subset of 150 that I can determine.
But what's the why to leap?
Usually
something more.
Well,
out
usually
there?
something negative happens at work.
Uh-huh.
So one of my favorite ones, it was done by my co-host, Scott Merritt, a woman named Leah Gorham in Canada, who was a nurse. And during COVID-19, she had been attacked by a patient at one point. And during COVID-19, it just got so bad in the hospitals that she said, I can't do nursing anymore. And she quit one day and she decided to become a truck driver. And she drives an 18-wheeler.
Wait, why a truck drive?
Her boyfriend was a truck driver.
Okay,
So they drive together.
A little bit more clarity here.
Right.
But she's super happy driving a truck. And she just said nursing became so intense, so difficult, particularly during COVID-19. But I guess you could call it trauma as well. But she had a second incident of a patient attacking her. And she just said, it's my last day. I'm done.
But think about that from nursing, not only taking care of others, now she's taking care of herself. And that brings her contentment.
It does, and she really enjoys the travel. She says, I get to see parts of North America that I've never seen before, and she just enjoys it.
See,
and
answering the why. It's so important.
Yeah. Number 4, expect barriers, lots of them. I've yet to interview anybody where the second act was a straight line. It was just an easy path. I interviewed a guy named Chris Donovan. Chris Donovan was a telephone repairman for 25 years. And he didn't really like the job, but it paid the bills, and that's what he did. But what he was really interested in since high school was designing women's shoes. And he said, I can go back to a moment in my sophomore year in a Catholic high school, and this student walks in with like 6-inch heels. And he just thought that was fascinating. They had to dress in this uniform, and they were allowed to wear whatever shoes they wanted. So, you know, that always stuck with him. So for 25 years, he would sketch women's shoes in different designs, and he never did anything with this, but that was just something that fascinated him. He got prostate cancer. It sort of jolted him again, example of trauma. And he said, I'm not going to play it safe anymore. I'm going to follow this dream that I have. So he started going to the Rhode Island School of Design, took a couple of courses there, and that sort of got him on the path a little bit. But then he noticed there was a 2-day seminar in New York City with a very famous shoe designer named Aki Chocolat. And he was from Europe, and he goes in, he takes this course with Aki, and they're doing sketches, whatever. And at the end of the day, Aki pulls him aside. There are like 20 people in the class. Aki says to him, "You were made to do this. You have to do this. You have to pursue this." Chris goes, "Well, how would I do that?" He said, "Well, you have to go to university in Europe. There's nowhere to go in the United States. You have to leave your home in Massachusetts. You have to go to," in this case, he ended up going to Polimoda Institute in Italy. So he calls up his partner that night and says, "I had this amazing day, and Aki says I should go to Europe and go to get a master's in this." And his partner just goes to him, "We'll sell the house. Whatever it takes, you're going to Europe. We're going to do this for you." There were all sorts of barriers along the way. They wouldn't give him a student passport because he was in his 50s. They're like, "Well, you can't be a student. This is impossible.
You have to stop learning.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
So the Italian government was a problem in doing this. Finally, they got by that barrier. They got him into the Polimoda Institute. He was a very non-traditional student, obviously, but with Aki's endorsement, they accepted him. But he gets over there, and he's among all these 20-year-olds, and here's this old guy who's a telephone repairman, and like no one could figure out what he was. So he was doing very poorly. He didn't speak Italian, all sorts of problems. He's away from his partner and he's miserable. And then finally something clicked with one of his professors, and his professor just gave him some encouragement, and it all clicked and it worked, and he became a great student. Anyways, come back to the U.S. He started his own line of shoes. Not only is he a shoe designer, but he actually does the manufacturing of it.
I love these success stories. I love that these are people who pivoted and they achieved such big transformations, big transformations. So tell us what number five is.
To me, this might be the most relevant, is that money is no substitute for purpose. And we've done 144 episodes at the time when I did this TED Talk of second act stories. In every single instance, the people who made the pivot were significantly happier, with one exception. And this was a gentleman named Steve Paz. He always wanted to be a police officer. And he joined the Dallas Police Force. He was a police officer for 15 years. He enjoyed the work. He thought it was great. He loved helping people. He loved the camaraderie of being a police officer. But in 2004, a family friend came to him and said, "I have this company. It's growing rapidly. I need someone I can trust in this vice presidential role. Will you take this job?" It was double the money he was making as a police officer.
Wow.
The hours were much, much better, and he wouldn't be risking his life every day, which his wife really appreciated. So he took the job. He talked to all his police officer friends, said, "Should I do this? What should I do?" Everyone's like, "Well, you'd be crazy not to take this. Of course you have to take this." So the next 3 years were really difficult for him because he didn't know anything about business. So it was a tough learning curve. But more importantly, he felt a tremendous loss of purpose. He loved being a police officer. He loved helping people, and that was now taken away from him. And so he was pretty miserable. Since then, he's found a way to recover his purpose outside of his work, and in terms of volunteer work, in terms of different things he does with the Boy Scouts, with a community group that he's involved in, that sort of thing. So he's figured it out, but it was a very painful switch, and he still misses being a police officer every single day of his life. That's the one example of a second act that was sort of made for the money that did not pan out in terms of happiness. It's a whole lot easier to make a pivot if you have a financial net. And there's a lot of people I've interviewed who have that financial safety net. There's some I've interviewed that have not.
Are there any lessons learned that you want to share, whether it be your own personal journey or what you've learned from others about mindset, belief, adaptability? You have 5 key lessons, but there are other things that are part of this equation.
The simplest one, and I put it in the rhyme of a song we all learned up growing up, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're unhappy and you know it, make a change. And so to me, to look at yourself in the mirror and say, listen, I'm really unhappy in this part of my life. I know I'm unhappy in it, and yet I continue it every single day. So if you're unhappy and you know it, make a change. That's number one. And we've heard that, from Gallup, 75% of America is unhappy at work. The second follow-up to that is change is not going to be easy. Don't expect it to be a straight line. You're going to have lots of barriers. You're going to have lots of problems. And the direction you think was going to be your second act, and you say, well, it's not exactly right. I need to twist and go in a little different direction. That I see a lot.
Tweaking is part of life.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you always have to be making adjustments. There's not one straight direction in which to go. You have to understand and monitor the things that come your way and be ready, willing, and able to shift that path a little bit to make sure you get around to the other side.
The last one I just share is going back to the money is no substitute for purpose. Most people I've interviewed make less money in their second act, but they are way happier. Way, way happier. There's not a single person that I've interviewed that would go back to where they were, and they're happy with what they've changed and what they've done.
So what's your best advice, personally and professionally, to those that are considering making a pivot in their life? And is there anything that you wish you knew earlier?
One of the most interesting things is this leaping and planning thing. I am more of a planner. Most people are, and most people, leaping would be a terrifying experience. One of the people I interviewed, she kept a little thing on her bedroom mirror that said, leap and the net will appear. The interesting thing to me is I don't find any evidence that leaping or planning one is better than the other. It has more to do with your tolerance of risk. And if you're going to have a strong belief in yourself and your abilities, I don't think it's a problem to quit one day and figure it out afterwards. It depends on your personal DNA, but there's no evidence that planning is a better approach than leaping, or leaping is a better approach than planning.
Yeah, I think it's certainly dictated by your personality type.
Yeah.
And
it really is.
And comfort zone.
Yeah.
And support system. I think having a support system around you is very important. Yeah.
The other just thing that I'll share, and this was a fascinating episode, a woman who was turning 50, and she basically said, in the year of 50, I'm going to try 50 different things in 1 year. And so every week she would try a new thing. She'd volunteer at a soup kitchen one week. She'd go in a canoe and clean up the garbage with a group of people in a river that was near her house. She'd do something different every single week for 50 weeks. And she'd journal about it and she'd write about it. And to me, that sort of led me to say, I'm going to try 4 things at the same time. I didn't go quite as far as she did, but that was eye-opening. She had a website called Follow Me to 50, and she got a pretty significant following of people. She was fascinating to interview.
And you and all of the stories you shared and that are on your podcast, Second Act Stories, are inspiring everybody out there. We get empowered by learning from others and by knowing that it's possible.
Well, thank you. I certainly hope your listeners will listen to Second Act Stories, and I hope my listeners will check out Between Over and Next.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, Holly, I can guess, knowing you, that you put yourself in that 25% of people that are happy.
Yes, I do. Wouldn't you put yourself there too?
Yeah, absolutely. Most days.
But isn't that a really large percentage?
Yeah, it's it's upsetting to hear. That's probably a somewhat conservative percentage. As sorry as that sounds, is probably a few people in that 25% that don't admit that they're unhappy.
Well, we're sharing through Between Over and Next and hollyandrobert.com and in real life and online is that you should live in the present moment with purpose and positivity and possibility, and to prioritize happiness and well-being with your purpose. Because when you do focus on that, you will experience a higher sense of fulfillment and satisfaction.
The thing really that I find after listening to Andy is the people who, really could make that pivot, that change into their second act, but don't do it out of fear, whatever that fear may be, but that's something that's holding them back from actually being their best selves, living their happiest life.
But I think you have to have some self-exploration, some experimentation, some self-discovery. The people he interviewed, They did all make conscious choices that align with values, their needs, their goals, and their strengths. And I really do believe you also need optimism, hope, gratitude,
Yes.
resilience.
Being positive from the start is important.
It creates a foundation.
Right. It puts you in
for
the
happy.
right frame of
Right.
mind. You know, you can't be happy unless you really want to be.
And you have to have a very strong sense of why you're doing what you do.
Yep.
It becomes easier to stay focused and persevere in the face of difficulties, which many of the stories he talked about, there was a challenge
Yes.
that was experienced.
Yep.
So I want to just conclude with this. Happiness is not a destination. It is a continuous journey. It is through finding meaning in our work and fostering positive relationships that we can create a culture of kindness and nurture a healthy work-life balance. So let us continue on this journey, armed with the knowledge shared in this episode, and strive towards a happier and a more fulfilled life.
Thanks for tuning in to Between Over and Next. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it meaningful and insightful.
If you value it to be worthwhile, please share it with your friends and family.
We would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to write a review for us. Your feedback will help us continue to create content that resonates with you.
And don't forget, in the show notes, you can find all the relevant links mentioned in this episode, from accessing free downloads to visiting our website and more.
If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Simply send us an email. Our email address is hello@hollyandrobert.com. We're always excited to connect with our listeners.
So until next time, thank you again for joining us on Between Over and Next.
Thank you for listening to Between Over and Next, the podcast that navigates the twists and turns of life with courage, laughter, and a whole lot of inspiration. Tune in every Tuesday to hang out with Holly and Robert on your favorite podcast platform. Visit hollyandrobert.com and follow them on social media to ignite your passion and fuel your dreams.